All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tara. I work with Fayette Factor, nonprofit organization in Fayette County, as well as our Drug-Free Fayette Coalition. I'm so excited to welcome you guys here to this event tonight, where we will be talking about navigating the landscape of youth behavioral health and substance abuse.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. I can hear you. My name is Dr. Krista Grayson. I am the coordinator for Fayette County DUI Court and Veterans Treatment Court. I also have a private practice where I focus on substance abuse, anger management, mental health, all things trauma-informed care, gender identity. I'm also a military veteran, so if any Navy vets are in the house, go, hey, shipmate. I'm excited to be here tonight just to bring a wealth of knowledge and share this opportunity with our panelists.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Prowant, and I am in private practice at Arise Counseling and Coaching. I've been in addiction, mental health for about 14 years in a residential program first, and then private practice. And I'm just really passionate about helping individuals, families be the best, live their best life, be their best self, heal from the inside out, and just live that life of harmony through breakthrough. And so I'm excited to be here with all the panelists as well and just share. So hopefully you all can take away something tonight that's going to be impactful for your life.
My name is Nick Rebels, and I'm the facility director for the Insight program here in Tyrone, Georgia, just up the road. What Insight is a substance abuse treatment program for 13 to 25-year-olds, doing primarily intensive outpatient. I've been a substance abuse counselor for about 10 years, doing a number of different jobs, primarily working with teenagers and young adults. And I just celebrated 13 years sober a few weeks ago. Thank you. So I have my own lived experience as well to go along with the work I've done over the last decade.
Hi, I'm Dr. Carolyn McDermott, and I grew up in Peachtree City since the 70s and have seen it change incredibly a lot. But I currently work at Open Campus Academy, where I do serve students from all 5 high schools in the county, so I have my pulse on what's going on in the different schools. Unfortunately, I also have a personal story. I lost my oldest of 3 children in November from a fentanyl overdose, so I have input to share from a parent perspective as well.
Hi, my name is Doreen Barr, and I'm just a mom. We've lived through this addiction with my son. Well, he's been gone. It'll be 9 years in May. We've gone through this all for about 12 years now. And we started in Ryan's name. It's a nonprofit 501c3 for drug education, awareness, prevention. We'll go anywhere, talk to anyone, supply Narcan, supply fentanyl test strips, lock boxes, Deterra, anything that they need. And we'll also help their person either get into detox, rehab, or counseling. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alicia Zondervan. I'm also just a mom. I was born and raised in Fayette County, and I've raised 4 kids in Fayette County. They're now the ages of 16 to 24. And we had our experience, me and my son, with substance abuse when he was a teenager and sought treatment in 2018. And since then, because of the help that not only the treatment center that we went through gave to Caleb, but also the support that I got from the parent group and the changes that I've made in my life, I'm just super passionate about speaking out about this matter, raising awareness, helping others navigate the difficulties concerning that, and that's why I'm here tonight.
Hi, I'm Caleb Moore. I'm a recovering drug addict. I was born and raised here in Peachtree City, or Fayette County, and I started substance abuse when I was 15, and I started the journey to recovery when I was 18, but yeah.
Well, yes, so thank you. Welcome to our panelists. And again, welcome to all of you guys here. We are incredibly grateful that you took the time out of your evening to come join us for this really important conversation. Before we start, I just want to kind of run the agenda by you. So we're going to start with some panelist questions and answers. And then once we get through that, we're going to give you guys an opportunity to ask them any questions that you may have. All right, so again, we hope that this event exceeds your expectations. Some really powerful stuff to be discussed here tonight. So again, we welcome you. So let's get it started, guys. So our first question, based on your professional and/or personal lived experience, what are some of the most common behavioral health challenges impacting the population you work with, or that you most often hear being expressed by youth or parents in the community?
I guess I can start this one off. In my field, one of the biggest things is stigma. Everyone is so scared of being labeled. No one wants to be called the A word. Nobody wants to be an addict. No one wants to seem weak. The fact that you are struggling with a substance use disorder has the stigma of you not being strong enough to kick it. Family members thinking it's an off and on switch, that you can just turn it off and turn it on, and that's not the case.
In private practice, I see a lot of parents and teens, and a lot of the complaints about what teens are coming in with is anxiety, depression, a lot of stress reactions. Instead of being able to manage their stress in a healthy way, it's really stuffed and ignored and pushed down and just pushed through. And so that ends up resulting in a lot of mental health issues. Doesn't mean they have a mental health disorder, but their struggle is real nevertheless. And then from parents, I hear a lot of complaints about what's happening in that stress reaction is there's a lot of impulsivity that's happening. There's a lot of to the other extreme, unmotivation or lack of motivation, and just emotional dysregulation, where they just can't really cope with their own emotions.
So I would echo what both Andrea and Krista said to start off. I would say the couple of things to me that I come across the most with parents and with kids is lack of emotional coping skills, lack of self-esteem, and lack of a positive peer network. Like, those seem to be the biggest challenges that kids today are facing, and by proxy, parents are, as a result, facing in those challenges with their kids.
I'm going to agree with the anxiety. Our students are under a lot of pressures if they don't fit into a certain mold. And parents, some of us are like that too, right? If our kid is in 8 AP courses and in 7 travel leagues and they don't speak 6 languages, we're not competing. Look at Facebook. So I think there is a lot of pressure for the parents and the students in our community in that regard.
And I can talk some of what Krista said about the stigma. We're in this bubble of Peachtree City and Fayetteville. When our son came to us and told us he had a problem, I didn't tell anybody. I was ashamed, I was embarrassed, I was scared, I was mad, I was angry. I didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until the day that I got the phone call that my son was found dead in his car that I told anyone outside of my family. My best friend, I had to call her and say, "You need to come to my house," because I was home alone. So it's the stigma of it. They're not bad kids. You're not bad parents. So we need to have more conversations like this to break the stigma.
Absolutely. The things that came to mind in the population that I am gathering this from would be my peers, so parents, other parents of teenagers, my 4 children who are, as I said, 16 to 24 years old, and even my kids' friends. I feel like the biggest one I see is self-esteem, and then also the fitting into the certain mold, the academic or performance pressure, whether it be sports, grades, just they're comparing themselves to people that they think have their lives all put together in this whole plan out, and that's just not the reality. And then I think the biggest one is just misconceptions among parents and among kids about the dangers and risks of drugs and alcohol.
The main challenge that I hear about is the challenge for young people to get sober. It's not easy to get sober regardless, but especially for young people, it's usually extremely difficult.
You guys can hold on to that one now. Yeah, so, in setting this kind of landscape, what's kind of being communicated here really goes along with what we're going to kind of talk about next. So if you guys could just share with our audience, what are some of those common signs that families and parents can look for that may indicate their child is experiencing maybe a mental health or substance use related challenge. But even more so, what are some of those lesser known or maybe commonly overlooked signs and symptoms that parents should also be aware of?
Did you want to start with?
Yeah, go ahead, just start, whoever.
Okay. So I guess I'll start on we definitely over time saw some signs like the classic signs, which would be decline in school, dishonesty, sneaking around, and gradually sharing less about dynamics going on at school or with friends but in hindsight, some of the signs that I see now were signs that I think easily could be classified under normal teenage behavior, just like, oh, they're at that phase where they don't want to hang out with their parents anymore, or, the parents aren't cool to talk to, or they're just wanting to hang out in their room. And the point of that is just that I think that the signs aren't always as obvious as you may think. And when you're in a situation, the other thing that I learned is that when you're in a situation that is emotionally charged because you want the best for your child and you have fear over their future, then it's just things become unclear. And where we found ourselves is in a progressed situation, not knowing what to do, and honestly just like going into denial. We found ourselves searching for justifications or solutions or fixes or answers to what we saw before our eyes, anything but being able to see what it really was. And that kind of delayed us in seeking help.
I know when our son came to us and told us he had a problem, he told me things to watch for. Ryan was a gym rat. He lived in the gym. His goal in life was to own a gym one day. And he told me that if I'm not going to the gym every day, I'm using. If I'm nodding off, falling asleep, I'm using. If my temper seems to flare, I'm using. If I'm not eating healthy, I'm using. And I would have never thought. We missed every sign that there was.
On that note, our son Gannon came to us on December 9th, 2022 to tell us he had an addiction to pills, and we had him in rehab the next day, and he was dead 11 months later on November 10th. And so most of what we saw was in hindsight because he was not living at home when he came to us. But I'm going to say money issues. We started getting those little, I'd never seen him before, these little things. He was overdrawn. And it happened a few times. And I'm like, dude, why are you not managing your money? You're making $55,000 a year. What's the deal? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Sleep issues. He always looked tired, but I just thought he's 21. He's probably up late. He's probably, drinking, whatever. But a big one for us, Gannon was always a little heavy, and he got really skinny, and in my stupidity, I'm like, wow, you look great. You have lost so much weight. But then there were times I'd be like, Gannon, you want a piece of cake? I'm not really hungry. Well, that's not Gannon. And now looking back, loss of appetite is extremely common with opioid addiction. So those are all hindsight, but those were big ones for us.
So I would say all of those are great ones. As far as the ones that you wouldn't commonly think, I was thinking of my own experience, and I was not what you typically would have thought as far as the signs and symptoms. Like, I still got pretty decent grades, I still played sports, I still had a lot of those different things. Like the signs and symptoms for me were things that, and you actually spoke to it, Carolyn, a parent's intuition is gonna know the difference, right? One of the things that I'll tell a lot of the parents that I work with is trust your gut, right? Like, your kids best. And ultimately, even though it may not seem like there's signs and symptoms that fit the classic mold of what you would typically think goes along with a mental health issue or substance use issue, trust your gut. You ultimately know your kids best, right? The other things I would say too, that I know for me, I was very emotionally volatile. That was a big one. Like, kind of out of nowhere, I all of a sudden was ones and tens, right? The other thing that I would say is this sudden shift in my friend group, right? Like, it was overnight, I went from having one group of friends to a totally separate group of friends. And again, I think for my folks, they just went, okay, well, you're 15 and in high school, and just kind of navigating that. But that was definitely a telltale sign for me where, and one of the things that my dad had told me later was that the new friend group that I had, my parents never met them, and I never wanted my parents to meet them, right? Because I knew the second my dad saw them, he wasn't going to be okay with it. So.
Yeah, just ditto to all of that. The only thing I can really add to that is, and you kind of said it, a few of you already said it, it's just them being oversensitive to a lot of things. It could be volatile, but it also could just be just overreactionary to everything, even to minor stress situations or stress that they could normally handle. And that's especially for mental health too. That's not just substance abuse, but just if they're struggling with their mental health, they might be, like their tipping point, their stress tolerance is very low. So they may just tip over that edge really quickly. And so that's really what I can add. I mean, we often see, like in private practice, doing mental health and substance abuse, I can say there are people, teens that struggle with substance abuse, obviously with mental health without substance abuse, but we rarely see people in substance abuse without mental health. So you can have the mental health, not struggle with the substance abuse, but usually the other ones are very co-occurring.
I would say I'm going to go to the opposite end of everyone else and say the hyper-focus kid, the overachiever, the one that studies a lot, can be, especially if they weren't that way before, just really fixated on things. I have personally counseled kids that have been very, very focused on homework or sports or family or whatever it is, and this child was abusing Adderall unbeknownst to, the parent. So it can be the extreme. So there's no cookie cutter here. There's no direct formula we can offer. You've experienced your kid, you've learned them, you've watched them. Have the hard conversation. Ask them, say it out loud. Like whatever the substance is, like, are you doing drugs? My daughter's in college, she's a sophomore, and I just asked her the other day, I said, hey, Deja, I said, have you tried weed yet? And she was like, no, Mommy, I haven't. Why are you asking me that? Because you're in college. Like, have you experienced these store-bought drugs? Psychedelics are a thing now with young kids. So say the name of the drug, ask it directly, don't try to sugarcoat it, but just keep an open door and don't bash them for saying yes. So.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think one of the things that I picked up on there with all of the symptoms you're talking about is that a lot of times these can actually mirror just very common challenges and things that are going on with our young people, right? There's a lot of stress things going on. We've had a lot of changes over the last 3 years. So I really like, you know your child, and I think it's really, really important. And so now I kind of want to turn to Caleb. So I would like to see if Caleb can share some of the reasons young people choose to use alcohol or other substances that are completely unrelated to there being any type of challenge, so any type of mental health stressors or anything like that.
Sure. So for me personally, I wasn't experiencing all of these crazy challenges before I started using drugs. Simply, my friends started doing them and it seemed fun. So I decided to try them. And that's really pretty much it. It was a pretty quick decision, actually. And most of my life before that, just to note, like I was actually very against drugs. Like I had seen drug addiction, and my father was an alcoholic and an addict most of his life, not recovering, and I saw what that did to somebody, and I was really against it. And when my friends started doing them, it didn't seem like it was this bad thing, so it just seemed like they were having fun.
Yeah, and we'll go into a little bit more of that, kind of the perceptions of risks and harms, but I thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's really important to hear some of those, stories like that from personal experience. Alicia, were you going to say something?
No, I didn't know if Nick or anybody else wanted to feed in.
Okay, great. Sure. So let's move into a little bit more talking on a broader, scope of things. So can you guys share what are some of the challenges commonly experienced by families and adolescents, teens in Fayette County that people may find surprising?
I am so, like, I deal with a lot of adults now, like, in my full-time job. And most of the adults I deal with, their substance use disorders started as a kid. They were first introduced at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old to alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, these drugs. And one thing that has kept them in their addiction for so long is the enabling parent, family member, sister, cousin, aunt that has made excuses, has justified the behavior, has been the one that felt guilty for wanting not to turn their back against them, to not let them go into treatment, to just keep feeding this habit that they have, has kept them into this place where it's become damaging to their growth, damaging to their kids and their family members. So the enabling family member is probably one of the biggest things ever, or the blind eye family member, the one that justifies the behavior. Like, you see the signs, you see everything, but you don't want to call it what it is because you don't want it to be in your family.
I would just say time management, and again, it just goes back to stress and pressures of academic and athletic performance, I think is really big. That's some of the things that really cause them, because they're going to seek, they're pleasure seeking, right? If they're going to use drugs, they're trying to escape all the pressure. So that's one of the things I think that's really big. And just not having that ability to do something where they don't feel judged, like they're not feeling like they're under the microscope, that they have to perform. They need playtime. They need time where they can just go out and explore and do fun things, try new things without feeling judged. And just allowing them to be able to do those things, like that's normal, is really key, I think. The other thing that I think is a lack of problem solving. Like, I think and I'm speaking to myself here, like I did a lot of over-parenting, and so that doesn't give them an opportunity sometimes to really solve their own problems. At home, when they're under the covering of the home, where they can make mistakes and learn from them before they leave. And I think that's really a challenge of a mindset shift for us as parents to give a little bit of like leeway there, like not trying to fix everything for them and solve their problems.
So I would say, as far as what people may find surprising, there are a lot of things that I think Fayette County as a community does very well, right? One of those things, however, is not having uncomfortable conversations. This is an uncomfortable conversation to have. The reality is that in the work that I do, working with teenagers and young adults, I mean, they'll end up being pretty candid with us, right? The reality is that in the schools, teenagers specifically, young adults definitely, in this county struggle so much. And I think part of the problem when it comes to substance use and mental health is that, honestly, I don't think there are a lot of the adults in the room that really want to address that or talk about that or admit that there's a problem, quite frankly. So as far as what is surprising is that for a county that excels in a lot of areas, this is an area that we do not excel in. And again, the adults in the room, it's on us, right? Like that's why these conversations to me are so critical and so important. So, as far as what's surprising, I think that's very surprising to me. I think the other thing that is surprising is as a result of, I would say, a pretty wide level of affluence within the county, right? Accessibility to drugs and alcohol is wild. I mean, it is absolutely wild. So, I had a kid once tell me that it is easier, they could get heroin quicker than they could get alcohol, right? And I think for our youth today, like, that is alarming, right? The other thing that I would say too, and then I'll move on from this, but I think the thing that's more so surprising than anything else is anybody I have talked to in the time that I've lived here, which is only 2 years, I haven't lived here a long time, but anybody I've talked to about these issues, everybody goes, yep, it's a problem. It's such a problem, right? And we'll have that conversation and everybody seems to know it's a problem, but yet there's no solution, right? And so part of, for me, why this conversation is so important is to be able to start to talk about what are those solutions. So.
Yeah, if this was an AP parent night, this room would be standing room only. That makes me sad. Because to me, I don't care how much rigor your student has if they're not healthy and happy and able to be functional adults, right? But I know I'm not in the mainstream for the school system on that note. But the stigma piece, when I first found out my son was an addict, like Doreen, I didn't shout it from the rafters. It was kind of like, how are we here? How are we this family? My husband and I are educators. What is this? But I learned quickly. I joined a support group very fast, and I suggest you do that if you're going through this in your family. Everyone in my group looks just like me. Upper middle class, lawyers, doctors, teachers. It's not who you think. Whatever that idea you have in your head of the addict, take it away with these new opioids. They look just like your kids and my kids. So that stigma has got to go.
Going back to what Nick said about Fayette County, I hate to say this, but I think a lot of this needs to be put on our school system. Fayette County schools do not want to talk about drug problems. They want to sweep it under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. Well, I'm here to tell you it does exist. Parents need information. 12 years ago when we started going through this with my son, drug-free Fayette didn't exist. You know, it's like, where do I go? What do I do? Who do I call? There was nothing local here. And parents need to know, I could make a list. Drug dealers deliver. They come down from Atlanta, they meet kids on their golf cart, on the golf cart paths, and they deliver. I had one, when my son came and told us he had a problem, I quit my job. I said, you're not going anywhere without me. He was still getting the drugs. I'm like, Ryan, how did you get it? Well, Mom, don't you know drug dealers deliver? He would put a baggie outside of our house with money in it, and the dealer would come down later that night and swap it out. Our golf cart paths, let me tell you, that's a haven for drug deals. Parents need to know these things. The things that they're selling in our gas stations and convenience stores, the Delta 8, the Delta 9, the Kratom. Kids are dying from Kratom. Why are we allowing this as a society to happen? Why aren't we all in an uproar and we go to the city council or whoever and say, enough is enough, stop this, we don't want it?
Speaking just to my personal experience with the challenges that we faced when we were in this situation, in a nutshell, for me, it came down to lack of resources and information and stigma, which led me to feeling completely alone. And same thing, while I feel like our county has a reputation for being a great community, great place to raise families, great schools, great churches, and it is, but when it came to this matter, I had no idea what to turn. But I was very informed about AP classes, academics, colleges, what to do to get my child there. You know, but the fact that this is not being widely discussed amongst peer groups or even just within the school system or churches leads you to feeling like no one else is experiencing it and feeling like there's something wrong with you or something wrong with your parenting or something wrong with your child. And, you know, stigma, I think, can go that way where it's like people are judging you or thinking it's a certain type of person that can experience this. But it also, I experienced that I had friends and peers that were saying, you know, they're just doing the normal teenage thing. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe you shouldn't helicopter too much. So I kind of had that pressure coming in too. And honestly, there was just I had no playbook to go by. And in the process of us like trying to figure out what to do, we ended up developing, being the enabling parent, developing dysfunctional patterns, and trying to control a situation that we had no control over because we didn't have the resources and information. And, you know, we learned the hard way that you can't control another human. But we also learned that the hope in that is that we weren't completely powerless. There were tools to learn and there was help to find. And I'm thankful that that's ultimately where we ended up.
Nick already touched on it, but the open access to drugs is the thing that comes to my mind that I know my parents, for one, found surprising, and I even found surprising. The first time I was exposed to drugs was actually at school in middle school. So.
Yep.
I think, we do focus a lot. It is an affluent area, but I also know that there's a lot of underserved in our community as well. And they're struggling just as much, and they don't have the funding to get resources to go out and pay for programs that their kids need. So that's kind of surprising. You would think that everyone in our community would have, the resources, financial resources for that, and they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I think that moves in, kind of transitions us into the next question, where we're really kind of getting into talking about how misconceptions and then things like, our youth perception of risk and harms and things like that, how these dynamics kind of play together. So a little bit of data to kind of lead into this question here. So according to the recent data from our 2023 Georgia Department of Education Student Health Assessment Surveys, there are some concerning trends specific to students' perception of risks and harms of substance use, most notably when it comes to marijuana use. So when students were asked, how much do you think people risk harming themselves physically and in other ways if they smoke marijuana once or twice a week? 34.20% of 12th graders said it poses no risk. 27.30% said it poses only a slight risk. So we have, a significant portion of our 12th grade students who see smoking marijuana once or twice a week as no risk or slight risk. So, kind of leading into that, so what role does perception of those risks and harms associated with alcohol and drug use play in terms of influencing a young person's decisions around whether or not they may experiment with or use alcohol and drugs? And what are some other factors that play a significant role in molding their child's perception of alcohol and drugs?
Oh, okay. I would say because I've raised a kid that was stuck into social media. Social media has really romanticized getting high. It has made it okay. It has made it cool. It has made it acceptable. It has made it trending. So it's really not a big deal to smoke weed. Like it's not a big deal to do mushrooms. It's not a big deal to take gas station drugs. So I think society has put the kids in front of TVs and devices that absolutely condones all of these negative behaviors. So that is one struggle, detaching them from that and really educating them on the harms that they're doing to their brain, their body, their growth when it comes to that. Fortunately, I've been doing this for a very long time, and my daughter has seen the detriment of substance use disorder, but when you educate the kids on exactly what they're taking. And I'll tell a quick story. I had to deal with a family yesterday. A little boy, he was 15 years old, overdosed on vape pen at school and had to be rushed to the hospital non-responsive. 15 years old, this is a nicotine stick he was on, and overdosed on it. His parents let him do it because they thought, it's nothing, it's just, I would rather you vape than get high, but he overdosed on it. He's still in the hospital today on a ventilator. So knowing the harms and the causes of what we're really saying when we say, oh, it's nothing, or I just rather you do it at home instead of out in the streets, the precedent that you're setting, the okay that you're giving in that moment. So it speaks volume.
Yeah, one of the things we teach in Prom for Life, which is a risk reduction program, is that just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. And so I think that there's a lot of misperceptions around that. If everything was safe that's legal, then cigarettes would be safe. Alcohol would be safe. So, and just because something if it's not regulated and it's on the market, doesn't mean it's safe either. So there's just a lot of misperceptions I think about, especially with legalization of marijuana in some states. That's really caused a general consensus that somehow, and because there's medical benefits, that it's safe, and that's just not true and not the realistic. So yeah, I think that's a big problem among youth and also with parents, like they're going to experiment. So pot or marijuana, THC is the safest drug to experiment with, is kind of the perception out there. So that's not good.
So, I mean, there's a lot to say about this specific question, right? So, as far as teenagers and young adults' risk perception when it comes to marijuana, there is no risk perception for them. There is no perception of risk at all when it comes to marijuana for teenagers today, because as a society, we've eliminated all perception of risk when it comes to that, right? So the hard part is, I think, most teenagers, like that number, 34%, honestly, that's just the kids who are willing to be honest, right? Like, I'm sure that number is actually higher of kids that actually think it poses no risk at all. The reality is, in my opinion, and this is, going to seem strange, but to me, marijuana is the most dangerous drug there is to teenagers today. The reality is that the adolescent brain is still developing until minimum the age of 25. When you introduce a substance that also is more potent than it's ever been, that completely hijacks the prefrontal cortex, which is where emotional regulation, emotional processing, decision-making is all formed, especially in very formative years, right? What you have done is you have completely hindered somebody's ability to grow emotionally, right? So you play that out over the course of 15 years, you're gonna have a 30-year-old who emotionally operates at the age of somebody who's actually much younger, because once you start smoking pot, it stunts the growth of that part of the brain. And with how potent THC is specifically today, there's actually digress that starts to happen, right? So you have adults that quite literally emotionally respond to their lives like children, right? So as far as, what is the risk perception today? The risk is bigger than it's ever been. The perception of that risk is lower than it's ever been. And that's a huge part of the problem. I think the other part of that is, even with alcohol, right? Like I would say almost the same thing. It's a little bit different only in the regard that you're gonna see far more alcohol commercials than you are weed commercials, at least in Georgia, because it's not legal as of yet, right? I think alcohol and teenage drinking falls in that same category. I think it's just more socially acceptable because every other commercial on the TV is an alcohol commercial, right? And the hard part is and this isn't from a place of judgment, this is just a fact. When there are parents that allow their kids to drink, the rationale behind it isn't necessarily from a bad place. It's the notion that, okay, maybe we can let them drink and we can kind of control it and they can be safe, right? But for somebody who, going back to what I just said, whose brain is still developing and does not have the emotional maturity to understand that rationale, right? All you have done is you have okayed it in their mind, right? And for teenagers and young adults, you are still the authority in their lives as a parent. And so it's a very confusing message for a kid to get. So then when they do go off to college, right, and they have those moments where there is no parental monitoring, now mom and dad have okayed it, so what's the big deal, right? The perception of risk you have just eliminated again, right? So I think those are the things to me that, as far as what faces our youth today, those are the biggest pieces.
And piggybacking on what he said, I'm going to date myself, but in the 80s, you could smoke some weed and you would laugh a little bit and eat a brownie. This is not that weed. These dab pens, they're not smoking weed. They're smoking out of these dab pens. It's concentrated. It's like 90% THC. There was one of my son's classmates took a hit off of it for the first time and had a seizure, and they had to call 911. They are also finding fentanyl, being sprayed in these and on regular weed. So it is not the weed that we think of from back in the day. It's way stronger, which I think we fought weed for a long time. I got the first call when Gannon was 16 from Starr's Mill. He had weed on him at school, and that's how I found out. And we fought it for years. He didn't progress till pills till he got to be about 20. But that stuff is so strong, I do think it makes you more likely to be willing to try something even stronger. The other piece I want to mention, in my day, you had the potheads, you had the jocks, you had the whatever. This is cross groups, y'all. My son smoked at his youth group by the lake. He smoked with his beta club tutor, and he smoked with his football players in the locker room in high school. This is everywhere. This is not a certain group of kids. So I can't stress that piece. And my son was gifted. He never got arrested. He'd never been in trouble at work. The day before he died, you would never know it. He hid it so well. So that's just something to note.
And kids, especially teenagers, they think they're invincible. I can remember Ryan saying to me, "Mom, it'll never happen to me," because we would have discussions. And for me, with marijuana, the big game changer today is fentanyl. When you're finding marijuana laced with fentanyl and one time can kill, I mean, kids aren't supposed to die from making a mistake. They're supposed to learn from their mistakes. But with fentanyl, it's a game changer.
I'm going to speak just to the parent side because Caleb can speak to like his perception of risks. But I feel like the minority, honestly. I have a 16-year-old, and I hear just a lot of misconceptions around parents. What you guys touched on of just like the approval, or we're allowing them to drink in our home to keep them safe, you know, or even the idea that only kids with underlying issues or like a addiction in their history will actually develop a problem, that they're really just, parents aren't seeing, from my experience and from the things I'm hearing from my peers, they're not seeing that, you know, it can lead to issues, and they're kind of operating under the idea that it's only bad kids, it can't happen to us. So that unawareness, I think, is just super dangerous. And then there's a big gap in what we feel like we're teaching our kids and what we think we're telling them the risks are, and what our kids are really perceiving those risks. Is that coming out right? Yeah. And I think that when we carry an attitude, even if we're not saying it to our kids, if we kind of carry that attitude of not thinking it's a big deal, it really rubs off on them and their choices. And I know that I was just not equipped, even though I had substance abuse experience from my childhood and past, or from loved ones, not from myself, but I thought that I had all the ways to talk to Caleb about the risks, and I was so far off in my approach, it's not even funny, you know. All the scare stories and everything, they just weren't the realities. And then, I mean, he can tell you more about that, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, so growing up, sorry that I started talking about it earlier, but growing up, I really thought that doing drugs would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me, and that I wanted to stay as far away from that as possible. Seeing the DARE program and commercials and hearing stories from my parents, I thought if I did drugs, I was going to end up homeless within a week. Or like the one commercial of the lady doing meth, that I'd be pulling my skin off. And I ended up going to high school, and I was seeing normal kids do drugs, and these kids seemingly like had nothing wrong with their lives. I remember one of the first wow moments for me was one of the kids that I had seen doing drugs at baseball conditioning signed a scholarship to his dream college and went to go on to play D1 baseball, and he was a drug user. And from that moment on, the thought of risk in doing drugs, at least especially marijuana, was completely gone. I didn't think that anything bad would happen because I was seeing countless kids who, some weren't, you know, I probably wasn't necessarily noticing the kids that did have problems, but I was seeing kids who lives weren't really changing much. So.
Yeah, and I think some of the ways that we can see this perception of risk and harm playing out, and talking about also things when you're talking about susceptibility for our adolescents and teens. So as far as this vaping now, it's like an epidemic. The vaping in the schools, we work with the schools very, very closely. Anytime I go into our high schools, the student resource officers are coming up to me. We got to do something about the vaping. We got to have some different programming in here. But what's really interesting about it is, statistically speaking, so data shows that 90% of individuals that smoke into adulthood started smoking before they were the age 18. And 99% started smoking by the age of 26. And so you get this combination of these risk perception or a lower, perception of risk, along with targeting different influences and things like that. And you can see how the susceptibility of that adolescent brain, the still developing brain, how that can really snowball very, very quickly. So yeah, thank you guys for sharing all of that. So this is really directed kind of more towards our behavioral health specialists here, or professionals. If there was one piece of advice or knowledge that you could pass along to every parent, what would it be?
That's a good question. It's a lot. Be vigilant. Have hard conversations. Know that it's not the end. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make your kid a bad kid. People recover. They absolutely recover, and everyone deserves an opportunity to recover. And most of the kids that I've talked to, or adults that started when they were kids, the reason they didn't say anything to their parents is because they didn't feel safe. They didn't want to be judged. They thought they would be isolated. They thought they would be thrown away. It made them feel less than. No, just hearing them and listening when they say that they don't want to, or they can't. Maybe there's a reason they don't want to do whatever that's happening, or that they can't do it. So just having that open communication where they can come and talk to you about anything without judgment. We used to call it in my house like the damn it opportunity. You can come and say whatever you want. Whatever you need to get off your chest, you can get it off. There's no consequences that's going to happen. And that is how you form a relationship. And they're not going to tell you everything, because my daughter's no way she's telling me everything she's doing at 20 right now. But the door is open. The door is open to have the hard conversations. Being a child, a person that grew up with both parents addicted to drugs, I absolutely know what it's like to live in a household with addicted parents and to watch what it's like to struggle. So, and I thank God that I had my grandparent that was there to be my safe place. So being someone's safe landing place can open an opportunity for them to just pour into you and tell you things and ask for help. And sometimes they don't even know what the help looks like. They don't even know that they need help. All they know that they're struggling on the inside and they really don't know what to do. But they don't have anywhere to talk to. So that's why when they come into your office, they're so open and so pouring everything out, because finally somebody sees me, somebody hears me. So even if you can't be that place, make a connection so that they can find somewhere that they can land.
Yeah, that's a good word. I was going to say that too. I think I always tell parents, be the safe place. That they, and we have to learn to respond, which is thoughtful action, instead of reacting, which is thoughtless action. Because I always tell parents, don't let fear be the loudest voice. Because if we let fear be the loudest voice, we're going to react. And thinking about it in terms of, obstacles are actually opportunities for growth. And if we come at it from that perspective, what are they going to, we want them to learn and be in a safe environment where they can learn from their mistakes. And creating that connection. You can't just jump in and solve a really big problem if you don't already have a connection with your kid. So really, kind of preparing the way along, just to make those connections with them and strengthen that bond. It's we call it relational equity. You're putting in a lot of deposits, so then when you have to withdraw, you have something to withdraw from.
So it's hard for me to choose just one, right? But I would say if I had to boil all of the ones I thought about down, is you don't have to know the right answers, you just have to know who has them, right? Again, as I was saying earlier, I think, it's tough to know that in this county specifically, because the reality is there's not a ton of resources out there. However, again, why I've been very excited about doing this is because it is to create, here we are, we are the resources, right? There are resources back there. There are people that you can turn to and ask for help. That would be my biggest piece of advice. Is I think a lot of times what happens is when parents struggle with whether it's mental health or substance abuse or both with their kids, it is an extremely isolating feeling. It is the feeling that nobody else is going to understand, nobody else is going through anything like it. And what's so interesting is the amount of parents that I've worked with in the last 10 years that have all felt that exact same thing, right? And the reality is there is always another parent somewhere, probably near you, more than likely even in your neighborhood, who is experiencing the same thing, right? So I would say you're not alone, and that there's hope, right? Like, I think that, it can be tough hearing some of, again, the uncomfortable truths of what the reality is. But I would say there is hope, and there's always somebody that can be there for you, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to kind of move on and ask a little bit the same question in a little different way to our parents and our young Caleb up here. So if you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice just prior to or early on in your child's struggle with either mental health or substance use disorder, what would it be?
Okay, my husband and I have 2 younger children, and you don't realize it till you start the roller coaster, but it's about to just completely hijack your family. It's going to be very emotional. It's going to be hard on your marriage if you're married. It's going to be hard on the other siblings. It becomes chaos, even with your best intentions. So I would have been more purposeful in my younger 2. I did get much better with it as time went on, but y'all, I'll never forget the day after Gannon died. I was laying in the bed with my 17-year-old daughter, and my younger 2 were adopted. My oldest was our biological, and she said, "Mom, does this hit differently? Does it hurt more because he was your biological son?" And I remember I put my hands on her sweet little face, and I said, "Honey, I know that Gannon has really sucked the air out of this family for the past year and a half, but he's not any more important than you or anybody else in the family." And it's really hard because my heart was broken. I was devastated, but we have to focus on everyone else who's in that house as well, and realizing the impact it has on them. Because it's a lot. There's some PTSD going on with my younger 2. That's a lot. They've gone through complete and utter hell by watching their older brother destruct and pass.
I totally agree with that. I would tell myself that I'm not alone. Our family is not alone in what we're going through. Like Carolyn said, it tears your family apart. I can remember we went to an addiction counselor with Ryan, and her advice to us was throw him out of your house. Throw him out and let him hit rock bottom. And I mean, that just hit me. And I wasn't going to do that. I said to her, "Do you have children?" And she said, "No." And then I got really angry, and I said, "Then how dare you tell me what to do with my child if you haven't experienced having a child?" And my husband was all for throwing him out. And it caused huge problems between us. I said to him, "If you can't deal with this, then you get out. I'm not throwing our kid out." I know it caused struggles with Ryan's brothers. I had to actually break up a knockdown, drag-out fight with my oldest and Ryan. That my oldest was so angry at him that, you're look what you're causing in our family. Look what you're doing. Mom's health is declining. You're just tearing us all apart. But then I have to think that we did the best that we could with what we knew at the time, and get information. Before you have to deal with something like this, read up on things, get information, so if something like this does happen, you're prepared.
This is going to sound like not the answer you're probably expecting, but I'm going to share on, I honestly can sit here and say that we've ended up with the best outcome I could hope for. And yes, I have a ton of regrets. And yes, we went through some really dark times and some struggles. And I've had to battle guilt over not intervening sooner. I certainly wish I had tools and resources and information that I didn't have. but ultimately, we did end up finding help, and I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for the Insight program and Andrew over there who led the way too, and the parent support group that gave me the tools that I needed and to at least help Caleb get in the door and support him along the process. But then I can't take any credit after that because he had to own his own recovery, you know. But because of the hard things that we went through, and like they said, I mean, it was dysfunction in the family. It was, you know, we were turned upside down. But now I can sit here and say that this process has changed our family for the better. My husband and I's relationship, all three of Caleb's sisters experiencing, going through, seeing him go through recovery and what they have learned from that. And I'm sitting here with the best version of my son that I've ever seen, and I'm just incredibly thankful. But I would say to parents, you know, you're not alone. You don't have to go at it alone. Reach out for help quickly, you know, get support, and don't feel like there's something wrong with you, and be on your kid's side.
Yeah, I agree with everything that my mom was saying. I think, sorry, it's hard for me to think on this one. I think it was really important for me to have to own my recovery. So, and to get there, I had to hit bottom. So as far as any advice I would give my, you know, early in recovery self, or early in struggling self, like I don't really have much. But I do, you know, for anybody that's out there, I think it is important that they know that there is help, that they are able to be helped if they want that. So I guess that's the one thing I wish I had known sooner than I did.
And we're going to end up the panelist or the moderator questions here with you there, Caleb. So if you had to pinpoint a situation that really marked a turning point for you, so something that like really you can pinpoint kind of change the trajectory of your life, what would it be and why?
So I actually have like kind of a few scenarios that made me hit that point. One of my first points was getting arrested and getting multiple felony drug charges. That was kind of what opened my eyes to like that my drug use had now become real life. I wasn't a 15-year-old who was smoking a little bit of weed anymore. Now I was in big boy trouble. And that opened my eyes to being willing to look at a program, and from there I still wasn't willing to get help. I thought that, you know, maybe it was if the cops just hadn't had caught me that time, I wouldn't be in trouble, and that I didn't actually have a problem. I was still just another normal kid. I just happened to be the one who got caught. And I had been kicked out of my house multiple times before that, but finally my mom told me that I had to go. And before it had been my stepdad, and it was a little different with looking my mom in the eyes and her telling me that I couldn't be in her house anymore unless I was willing to get help. That is what, and then the stretch I did afterwards, because I still wasn't willing to get help, so I left. And the stretch I did afterwards, with now having exhausted every resource I had of where to stay and how to get food and everything like that, and hitting that bottom, was what made me willing to get sober for the first time. My first time sober didn't work, so now I'm on my second time sober. But I would say then the next turning point for me was completely leaving my old life. I moved to Roswell, Georgia. Now I live in Cumming, Georgia, which is right by it. But I moved to Roswell, Georgia, to a different rehab program, or the same rehab program, but a different branch. And that completely changed my life. I was able to get away from everybody that I knew and all of my problems. And I'm not necessarily saying that running away from your problems is the answer, but for me, leaving and going to a different program and then going all in on that program and completely owning my recovery was what changed my life. So.
Yep, well, thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. So we're going to go now to the audience. If you guys have any questions whatsoever about any of the stuff you've kind of heard, you want to ask any questions? Anybody got anything? You know, one of the things that I did hear, you know, talked about a lot there was about, you know, we talked about a lot of the issues, a lot of the things that we see going on right? But as far as how common these things are, or, you know, there's other families and other people in our community experiencing these things. I mean, what would you guys kind of share about that? Because what comes to mind to me is, you know, there's abnormal reactions to normal situations, and then there's normal reactions to abnormal situations, right? And so in an environment where there is high achieving schools, we've got a lot of academic pressure, we've got a lot of these things, you know, when parents start to see maybe challenges or that stress level, what are some things that that they can do? What can they do to take steps to kind of, you know, get help if they don't necessarily know what to do?
Well, like Nick said, you know your child best. My daughter, when we were going through the chaos of my son's addiction, was in dual enrollment courses. She got her CNA license as a junior and all of that. And at the end of her junior year, and I had emailed her teachers and said, look, her brother just relapsed. We have a serious crisis going on. And she was still trying to be talked into taking pre-calculus and AP courses. And I had to say, no, you're not. I don't give a crap how many AP classes you take. And I was able to bring her to the school where I am, and she graduated a semester early. I had to let her breathe. She was already an anxious person before all of this. I had to do what was best for my child. So remember that when you're hearing pressure or this and that, you know your child. And maybe your child does need to take a ton of AP, and that's where they're going to thrive. I'm not anti-AP, but you know your child. And I do want to give a shout out that our district attorney, Dan Hyatt, is here. He's prosecuting a case right now in Fayette County for a drug-induced homicide, and I'm very thankful that he's here tonight for our meeting, because we need these resources, and they're getting stricter laws to prosecute people who are selling these drugs.
Yeah, go ahead. Are you gonna say something?
I would give advice to parents that never say never. My son was an honor graduate, college athlete. Never say never. It doesn't mean they're bad kids, but never say never.
I'll just add one little thing, just kind of along the lines of what they were saying, is just meet them where they're at, have open conversations, be that safe space, and also be aware that what I have found with my own children is when they verbalize to me what they think my expectations are of them, it's totally different from what my expectations really are of them, you know. And so even though they might create that in their own mind, we just really need to be aware of those things and be able to speak to that.
Normalize therapy. Normalize therapy. It is okay. And like I tell people all the time, it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist. Like, normalize therapy. Like, it's okay for your kid. Your kid is gonna wanna go talk to somebody else just so they can process their day. Like, it's very inexpensive to have a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly conversation with someone that's not attached to them, that has a view unlike their parents. Normalize therapy. Make it okay for them to go. It is so powerful for a kid or anyone to sit across from someone that has unconditional positive regard for you, but absolutely can meet you where you are and just give you an opinion or some advice from a place where it's not biased. Because if my sister come and ask me questions, or like, I'll use Doreen. Me and Doreen are pretty close. I could not counsel Doreen. I love her too much. If she says that she doesn't like a certain person, I don't like them either. So just know that it's okay for you to connect them with a therapist. And they might not find the right therapist the first time. I tell people, find a therapist like trying on new shoes. Like, you got to try them out, walk across the stage, jump a little bit, jump off a ledge, see if it works, and if it bounces back up, okay, keep going. So let them explore, let them be a part of the process so they'll know that it's a tool. So when they get into these positions, when they get to college and they leave your house, they have a toolbox that they can dig in and start getting things out when they don't want to call and say, Mommy and Daddy, my life is burning down. So normalize therapy.
I'm going to have to add one more thing to that. After our experience of not knowing where to turn and being a massive enabler and all of the things that I tried to describe earlier, going through Insight with Caleb opened up the door for us to normalize therapy in our home. And now it's like my daughter will get jealous because she hears my other daughter's going to see Andra, and she's like, wait, she's my therapist, that's not fair, you know? So, I mean, it really is just such a healthy way of life. I think everybody can use therapy.
Yeah, and I will say too, just to add to that, that sometimes teens especially will be more receptive to coaching. And so, you know, coaching can actually help. And as a parent, learning to move from the cop to the coach is really important. So asking having candid conversations, learning to be really assertive in how you approach them, and being able to, you know, resolve conflict in a healthy way. Like those are skills that parents and their kids alike can learn as a family, and you can make it fun too. But I think coaching approach is a good way, because they seem to be a little bit more receptive to that.
So what I would say is be in your kid's corner ultimately, right? If the goal is to reduce stressors, then becoming a stressor yourself is probably not the best way to help them do that, right? And again, it's not intentional, right? I know for a fact my parents' aim was not to stress me out further, right? Where they came from was a place of wanting what was best for me and really caring about me. The hard part was that I think this is the case for a lot of kids, there can be times where they will feel like their parents are less in their corner and more looking for a specific outcome, and that's more important to them. That may not actually even be the case. But again, you're talking about somebody, especially teenagers and young adults, who the emotional developmental part of their brains have not fully developed, right? So it is really, really important to stay on your kid's side. I loved what you said, Carolyn, about that story, because I think that perfectly kind of illustrates, you know, at the end of the day, it is about meeting your kids where they're at and doing what is ultimately most loving and most helpful for their growth and development.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And, you know, that got me thinking now. We've talked a lot about, you know, some of the things that are going when maybe there's some more moderate problems or challenges their kids may be facing. But what are some of the things that families and parents can take away tonight about preventing those things, right? So, Andrew, you talk a lot about the resiliency, about, you know, learning those skills for coping and going through those things. So what are some steps or practical steps parents can take that actually work towards preventing those problems, to creating the safe space and these things prior to challenges?
One of the biggest keys that I found, and I specialize in this, but anybody can learn it, is emotional intelligence skills. That's self-awareness, self-management, and self-direction. So a lot of times you might know, even your child might know what's going on, and they're feeling all these emotions, but then they don't know how to manage it. How do they navigate through that? And then how are they directing themselves toward a goal, or you know, aligning their daily choices with a sense of purpose? And so those skills are key, I found, to prevention. That's just, you know, and then we were just talking earlier about meditation and just visualization and just cutting out the white noise. I mean, then that can look different for everybody, but it's so key. Your body is actually designed to be able to deeply think. Deep thinking, reflective thinking, those kind of things out of curiosity and not judgment. So when we do that, things bubble up from our subconscious and we get aha moments and we get revelation about what we can do differently. So we need to take time, downtime, and we call it time looking in my heart, you know, and exploring what's there, or just in downtime, playtime. There's all kinds of things we can do to release the stress in a healthy way, but not just pushing through stress, ignoring it, pushing down. Our body doesn't deal with it that way. It's a facade. It doesn't work. And eventually, it's kind of, I always say, it's kind of like a septic tank. It's going to spill over into lots of areas of our life. So it's kind of like taking that time to do some cleaning house, so to speak, inside and in your mind management. Those are key skills to prevent all of that, to really integrate your life and keep your well-being, protect your well-being. We can't afford to lose our mental health and our well-being, and we need to practice it as parents. And that's a model. Modeling that kind of lifestyle to your kids is really helpful.
I would just echo that. I one of the things that I see most commonly with the kids in our program is typically, because we have the treatment side for the teenagers and young adults themselves, but we do the parent support as well, right? More often than not is what I will say. Typically the parents change before the kids do, right? And most of the time when that happens, it gives the kids a better shot at making the changes necessary as well. Doesn't guarantee it. There are no guarantees with any of these things. But what I will say is that from my own personal experience, I remember having a conversation with my dad at one point where, again, I went through a 12-step program, and I remember the day that I came home and he was talking about working the steps himself, and it blew me away. And it was one of the more bizarre experiences I had because I didn't understand why he would do that. Right, but it was one of, in my recovery, it was a time that was extremely impactful for me where I truly felt like he was on my team and on my side, and that was such a big deal for me. And that was absolutely a game changer in our relationship, which, prior to that had been extremely contentious and volatile. So those things, right, me knowing that he was doing, he was working his program, right, and I was working mine was so beneficial. So,
one more thing to add to that, because, as a parent, I had a child, he's a son, he's 28 now, and he struggled with experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And I had also had it in my background, not my personal background, but my loved ones who were addicted. And I had a boyfriend when I was 17 who was killed in a car wreck drinking and driving. And so I didn't realize when he turned 16 and he started experimenting that, I was getting triggered so bad. I was having panic attacks and anxiety. And I didn't realize, I thought I'd already dealt with all the trauma of my past, but it resurfaced. And so I had to be very intentional to get my own healing on that level so that I could actually not respond out of fear toward him, and then also to really be transparent with him and say, hey, I'm scared. I'm really scared, and here's why. And that really meant the world to him. That he was sneaking out, going out, and we were punishing him, taking away all of his privileges, and none of that worked. But the minute that he snuck out one night, and I stayed up till 5 a.m. when he came home, and I met him after he went up to his bedroom. I went up there and I was like, hey, I'm really scared. Can we just talk? Are you okay? I'm like, I'm really not okay right now, but can we just talk? And we just talked. And he said after that, and this is years later, I didn't even punish him. I didn't do anything, no discipline or anything. And we just came to this level of understanding. And he told me years later when he was like 25, he said, Mom, I never snuck out again after that. And I was like, because that worked for me. And every kid is different. So one of the things that I always talk to parents about, I'm sorry, I'm hogging the thing, is to know your kid's strengths. If I'd have known my kid was a leader gift, I could have parented a lot different. So knowing your child's giftings and what their strengths are and leaning into that as a parent is huge. It's a game changer because he is a leader gift, and he would be like, don't tell me what to do. You're not going to tell me what to do. And so if I'd have understood that and not made it a power struggle with him, then I would have got a lot further. So anyways.
I'm just going to say, because if I'm hearing Andrew and Nick's stories and feeling like I have the same story, then there's got to be so many other parents that feel the same way. So just to echo one more little piece, that I was also very broken, and some of that didn't come to the surface for me until Caleb started struggling, and I wasn't equipped to handle it, and I had past traumas that came up, and it really was through therapy and through the parent group that I got help. And I just was loving what Nick was saying too, that then Caleb and I both shared our kind of like, separately, but then we speak the same language. When you open this up in your home and you're both working on yourselves, that's now the language that we talk. And honestly, more often than not, he's giving me advice these days. So just wanted to add that little piece.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you guys touched on that we did touch on earlier but stood out to me was specifically Caleb talking about how he had the DARE program, he had the scare tactics, he had those little educational pieces that were meant to be fearful. But what was actually more influential for him was what he saw happening around him in his environment, right? So we're back to these situations I've heard here where the influence that the way the parents do things, the way they maybe handle some of the stressors, the influence of what they're seeing is far more influential than what is being said. So we talked a little bit about parental approval going into youth perception, right? If you're telling them it's dangerous to drink, or you can't do this, there's all these issues or risks around it, yet they're allowed to drink, or they're going to other friends' houses and their parents are allowed, it creates that, what they're going to pick up on is, well, if my parents are letting me drink, for my birthday, me and a couple friends in the basement, it can't be that dangerous, right? And so I think it's really, what he said there was really important. I think what you touched on is that what they see you're doing, the external influences are far more impactful than just what they're hearing. So I think that's really important to consider. I just want to give an opportunity if anybody else, yes, sir.
This question is kind of directly to Carolyn. If you had the proverbial magic wand, but you only be able to use it just one time, what do you think the major change that could be made in Fayette County school system that would direct all of this stuff happening here, not to make it perfectly go away, but to take a lot of pressure off the kids and the parents, give parents a voice in the school, swing away?
Whew.
And I do have the right answer, just in case.
I do think it goes back to, you've got to advocate for your child, because certain schools are going to be different on how much pressure there is, and parents fall prey to that pressure as well. I don't think that Fayette County has a bigger drug problem than anywhere else, but it's here, and they need to let organizations in the school. Doreen was asked to put away a poster that had students in our area that have died because it was too upsetting to the students. That's wrong. What's upsetting was my daughter seeing her brother on the poster. You don't want your kid to have to see that, right? So we have to have honest conversations, because some of these kids are not getting it at home, and some schools are more open to it than others of letting them come in. But again, if you don't feel your child's up for dual enrollment classes or AP classes, don't sign them up. You do have the right to not put them in there. But there is a lot of pressure. There is the rigor. And we're a very diverse county that looks a lot different than it did 20 years ago, and not every kid's going to fit in a box. My son Gannon, the one who passed, was not a college-bound student. He was gifted, but he was working with a local plumbing company as an apprentice, making $55,000 a year at age 20, and was about to take the plumbing licensing test. But he said, I always felt less than because I wasn't going to college. Didn't want to go to college, so they don't go to college, but we were that house. But he certainly felt pressure and less than from the community. So I think you're going to have to be a voice, because I don't know that you're going to get it elsewhere.
Yeah.
I was thinking more along the lines, let's just say, across the board, no cell phones in high school.
Yes. I vote for that because besides the bullying, besides the parents contacting them during the day, they will pop up on Snapchat, and that's how my son relapsed. And they're making drug deals, and then they go away. And my son's person who sold to him is in jail. I was at his bond hearing yesterday. He did not get bond. Everything's through the phone. And his first relapse after 7 months clean was through a Snapchat that was sent to him. This man targeted sober living houses and NA meetings. So yes, cell phones and social media, in my opinion, are the absolute devil and the downfall. We have porn addictions, we have drug addictions, we have bullying. Yeah, I agree 100%.
What about PTO? Why, or are they involved in this side of activities?
Yeah, some PTOs are very good about it, but here's the thing. When you have a PTO meeting, guess who comes? The people who really don't need to be there half the time. That's the problem. Look, I mean, I'm so glad all of you are here. This should be packed. That's the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, and let me just point out, so I've actually been a resident of Fayette County for 42 years. I actually started experimenting with alcohol and drugs around 14, but by the age of 19, I was a full-blown alcoholic. By age 20, I was on my deathbed. It was my literal deathbed. And so having grown up in this county, I was also, competitive soccer player, fit that kind of mold or whatever. And I think it's really important to point out that, in Fayette County, there is a lot of amazing benefits, right? So a lot of the things we're talking about, there's good and there's benefit to these things, right? It was a great community to raise families. We do have good schools, right? There is opportunity that's here. So that is definitely a benefit, but at the same time, there is a lot of focus. So I work in the schools, I work closely with the county government, municipality government. We work with all sectors in the community, collaborative as well as our coalition. And one of the things that I think might be pretty obvious is that there's a tendency to sweep those things under the rug, right? So at certain levels, because it's Fayette County, right? Peachtree City, it's the bubble. And so while those things aren't bad in and of themselves, it's just important to be really aware of some of those things, because when you're aware of certain things, it allows you to then kind of see a little bit better what's going on. Does that make sense? So I think a lot of times with our schools, they do what they do out of the good intention, and I think we've heard that even when we're talking about parents enabling. There's a good intention there, right? Our county and municipality, I mean, we work directly with these people. They focus hard on making this a great community. And so it's not about that necessarily being bad, but it's about parents needing to be aware of, and this is what we do. We actually have youth action teams in 4 of our 5 high schools right now, and that's part of what we're having them do is being aware of certain things, but also having conversations, being able to have those conversations. And so, when you're aware of some of those challenges that maybe there may be a propensity to not talk about those things, it allows you to just kind of be more active and involved in asking those questions, right? So having conversations with your kids, getting to know the teachers. We work with youth advisors in our high schools that are teachers, and they have students coming to them all the time. They are very open to have these discussions about certain things and be honest about these things, So I think it's just important to kind of consider that. And I did want to also mention, I think we're going to kind of finish up here, mentioning the cell phones. So this event that we're doing tonight is going to be one of a series. And one of the things that we are so excited about is we received some funding to be able to bring an amazing documentary screening. It's called Screenagers. And so this documentary focuses on the influence of social media, of cell phones, about technology, growing up in that digital age, and how it actually impacts. I don't know if you guys have seen the documentary Social Dilemma. If you have not seen that, I think it's still on Netflix. I would just go watch that, right? So there's a lot of things that our young people are experiencing and exposed to that it's, even as graduating in the 90s, I kind of came through. We had nothing, then we had beepers, then we had cell phones, then we had, so it's very, very different. And so just raising awareness, educating yourselves, having those conversations with your kids are really, really powerful ways to kind of figure out what's going on, but just being aware of that is really, really helpful. So we're going to take a second, I think, and kind of let you guys know some of the resources that we have over here. So that's a big thing that we are we think is really important. And I think you heard from a lot of the parents up here, not knowing what's out there, what's available. And so as we're kind of finishing up, I'm going to have Ben quickly. I do want you guys, we want to be able to create this, like I said, as a series to be able to offer to the community. So we want to hear from you guys. What are some topics you guys are interested in hearing about? What are some things that this conversation has sparked with you? So if you could just take a second and do the little QR code thing. So if you just open your photos and kind of hold it up, you should see like a little link to click there. So just, you don't have to necessarily complete it now, but it is something that's really, really important to us. And so, do you guys have anything that you wanted to kind of finish up there? Talk about resources or anything that you guys have?
The only last thing, and you touched on it, the resources in the back, part of, the idea, obviously, with this conversation and the conversations to come is to be able to connect the resources with the community at large, right? I think that's been the thing that I've heard most commonly amongst all parents in the time that I've lived here is that we don't know what there is and there isn't, not only just in our community, but in Georgia at large, right? So these back few tables have a handful of different programs that are in, relatively like the Georgia area, right? But again, the goal being more so just to connect you guys with what there is out there as far as the help that's available.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're going to have our panelists as well as, some representatives from these resources kind of being around. So you guys, please feel free as you're leaving if you have any questions, if you want to hear a little bit more. I know one of the things you probably want to stop by is Ms. Doreen with her foundation. She's got a table over there that, has some information, kind of chat about those things if you feel so led. Well, with that, I think that we are going to go ahead and finish things up. I, again, want to thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your evening to come and be a part of this really important conversation. And we hope that it's been incredibly helpful for you, that you've been able to take away something. And again, we would love to get your feedback to be able to hear what's kind of going on. What are you guys experiencing? What are some of those topics that you want to hear about that? So if anybody else has no questions, then I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. Say thank you again to our panelists. Amazing job. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really, really important. So with that, we will close it out. Thank you guys so much.